Picture this. You're standing in a valley so vast it swallows the horizon, and everywhere you look, the ground is white with bones. Not scattered carelessly, but arranged as if some great assembly had simply stopped. Ribs curve like forgotten harps. Skulls rest in perfect rows. Femurs lie parallel as fallen columns of a temple that never was. The silence is absolute. This is death's archive, the museum of the ended. But what if I told you that in this place of ultimate stillness, a voice was about to speak? What if death itself was about to become a student, listening to lessons in resurrection? What if the impossible was about to become inevitable? This is exactly what the prophet Ezekiel witnessed when the Spirit of the Lord carried him to a valley that would redefine humanity's understanding of endings and beginnings. In that moment, bones that had forgotten their own names were about to remember how to dance. Dust that had surrendered to silence was about to learn to sing. But here's the deeper mystery. Was Ezekiel witnessing a prophetic metaphor for Israel's return from exile? Or was he being shown something far more profound? The actual mechanics of resurrection, the divine technology of bringing life from death. And what is this mysterious Ruach, this breath of God that can animate dust and awaken the dead? Today, we're going to explore how one prophet's vision of resurrection became a timeless meditation on despair, hope, and the breath that moves the universe. We'll discover why this ancient text still haunts our dreams and shapes our deepest beliefs about what it means to be alive. Because in the end, we're all walking through valleys of bones, personal, cultural, spiritual valleys, where something in us has died. And the question that echoes across millennia is this: can the breath of God still find us there? In the 14th year after Jerusalem fell, Ezekiel was about to witness the impossible, death taking orders from life. The year is approximately 580 BCE. Jerusalem lies in ruins, the temple is ash, and the children of Israel sit weeping by the rivers of Babylon. They have become a people of fragments, scattered like broken pottery across a foreign land. Their identity, their hope, their very sense of divine protection, all reduced to memory. It's in this context of ultimate desolation that something extraordinary happens to Ezekiel ben Buzi, the priest turned prophet. The text tells us simply, "The hand of the Lord was upon me, and he brought me out in the spirit of the Lord, and set me down in the middle of a valley. It was full of bones." But what kind of vision is this? The Hebrew word for valley here is biqah, not just any depression in the landscape, but a broad, flat plain. Imagine a natural amphitheater designed for the greatest performance never staged. And filling this cosmic stage, bones. The text emphasizes their condition with almost obsessive precision. They were very many and very dry. Here's what's haunting about this detail. Ezekiel isn't just seeing death. He's seeing death that has had time to finish its work completely. These aren't fresh corpses with the romance of recent tragedy. These are bones bleached white by years of sun, picked clean by time itself. This is death so thorough, so complete, that even decay has given up and moved on. But why bones specifically? In Hebrew thought, bones represented the essential structure of identity. They were what remained when everything else, flesh, blood, breath, personality, had departed. Bones were the architecture of what you used to be. To see a valley filled with bones was to witness the aftermath of hope itself. The Spirit makes Ezekiel walk among them. Can you imagine that journey? The crunch of ancient remains underfoot, the overwhelming scale of mortality stretching beyond sight. And then comes the question that changes everything. Son of man, can these bones live? This isn't really a question about resurrection. It's a question about impossibility itself. It's asking, can the absolutely finished become unfinished? Can the definitively ended become a beginning? Can death become material for life? Ezekiel's answer reveals the wisdom of someone who has learned to live with mystery. O Lord God, you know. He doesn't claim knowledge. He doesn't offer hope or despair. He simply acknowledges that some questions are too large for human understanding. But what if the bones themselves are trying to tell us something? In ancient Near Eastern thought, scattered bones represented not just death, but cosmic disorder. They were entropy made visible, the universe's tendency toward dissolution and chaos. To walk among them was to stand at the edge of unmaking itself. And yet, Ezekiel is not alone in this valley. The Ruach, the Spirit, the breath, the wind of God has brought him here. The same divine force that once moved over the waters at creation is now moving over the remains of the ended. Could it be that this valley isn't death's victory celebration, but rather death's final examination? As Ezekiel stands among the bones, listening to the silence that follows the question, can these bones live? He's about to discover that sometimes the most profound answer to impossibility is a command. Sometimes the best response to "it cannot be done" is simply watch. But before the miracle, there must be the word. Before the resurrection, there must be the prophecy. And what Ezekiel is about to speak into this valley of endings will echo through every human heart that has ever wondered if what's broken can truly be made whole again. God's solution to the impossible wasn't explanation. It was a direct order to the dead. What happens next defies every law of physics, biology, and common sense that has ever been discovered. God tells Ezekiel to speak to the bones, not about them, not around them, to them. Prophesy to these bones and say to them, O dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. Think about the absurdity of this command. Bones don't have ears. They don't have consciousness. They don't have the neurological infrastructure required for language processing. You might as well command the wind to sit down or order darkness to change its mind. This is divine instruction at its most paradoxical. But here's where the story takes a turn that reveals something profound about the nature of divine power. God doesn't work around impossibility. God works through it. The command to speak to the dead isn't given despite their inability to hear. It's given because of it. Ezekiel begins to prophesy, and immediately, something shifts in the valley. The text describes it with almost cinematic precision. There was a noise, and behold, a rattling, and the bones came together, bone to bone. Can you hear it? That first sound in a place that had known only silence? It wasn't the gentle whisper of resurrection we might expect. It was a noise. The Hebrew word kol suggests something sudden, startling, almost violent. Death doesn't surrender quietly. It argues, it rattles, but what kind of sound would this actually be? Imagine thousands upon thousands of bones suddenly remembering their connections. Femurs calling to hip sockets, ribs reaching for sternums, vertebrae clicking into spinal formation like an orchestra of instruments tuning themselves to the same impossible key. The bones don't just move, they organize. They sort themselves. Radius finds ulna. Tibia discovers fibula. Skull reunites with jaw. This isn't random animation. This is recognition. These bones remember how to be bodies. Remember the architecture of the human form with perfect precision. As Ezekiel continues to prophesy, the transformation accelerates. Sinews appear, connecting bone to bone. Flesh covers the sinews, skin covers the flesh. But here's the detail that stops everything cold. But there was no breath in them. Perfect bodies lie in perfect formation across the valley floor. Anatomically complete, structurally sound, but utterly still. They look exactly like living people, except for one crucial detail. They're not alive. This is resurrection's dress rehearsal, life's shadow without life's substance. What is the text trying to tell us with this intermediate stage? Why show us bodies without breath? Perhaps it's demonstrating that structure alone, even perfect structure, isn't life. Form without spirit is just sophisticated death. You can have all the right parts in all the right places, but without the animating principle, without the Ruach, you have nothing but beautiful corpses. This moment holds profound implications for how we understand resurrection itself. Is it merely the restoration of physical form, the repair of biological systems? Or is there something more fundamental required, some essential element that transforms matter from mere organization into actual life? The answer comes in God's second command to Ezekiel: prophesy to the breath. Not to more bones, not to the assembled bodies, to the breath itself. This time, Ezekiel must call upon the invisible, the immaterial, the force that transforms chemistry into consciousness. But what exactly is this breath that Ezekiel is commanded to summon? The Hebrew word ruach is notoriously difficult to translate. It means breath, but also wind, spirit, and life force. It's the same word used in Genesis when God breathed into Adam's nostrils the breath of life. It's the word for the Spirit of God that moved over the waters at creation. In calling upon the Ruach, Ezekiel isn't just summoning air to fill lungs. He's invoking the fundamental animating principle of existence itself. He's calling upon the force that transforms dust into dreams, matter into mind, biology into biography. And when the breath responds to his call, when it enters the assembled bodies from the four winds, the valley experiences its second miracle. These perfect forms draw their first breaths, open their eyes, and stand upon their feet, an exceedingly great army. But why an army? Why not a congregation, a family, a community? The choice of words suggests that what emerges from death isn't just life, but purpose. These resurrected beings aren't just alive, They're organized for action, prepared for mission, ready to accomplish something that only the once dead can accomplish. What is it that the resurrected know that the never dead cannot understand? What wisdom is gained in the valley of bones that can be learned nowhere else? The same breath that spoke worlds into existence was about to whisper life into bones that had forgotten their own names. To understand what Ezekiel witnessed, we must dive deep into the mystery of Ruach, that untranslatable Hebrew word that carries within its syllables the secret of life itself. This isn't just ancient vocabulary. This is the cosmic principle that transforms dead matter into living consciousness. Ruach appears in the very first verses of Genesis. The Spirit of God moved over the face of the waters. Before light, before form, before time itself, there was Ruach, divine breath hovering over chaos, preparing to speak order into existence. The same force that organized the primordial void is now being summoned to reorganize scattered bones. But here's where the mystery deepens. Ruach isn't just God's breath. It's also the breath within us. When Genesis tells us that God breathed into Adam's nostrils the breath of life, it uses the same word. The divine Ruach becomes human Ruach. We carry within our lungs the very breath of God. This means that every inhalation is a small resurrection, every exhalation a small death. Every breath connects us to the same life force that animated the valley of bones. We are living reminders that matter and spirit can dance together, that the divine and physical aren't opposites but partners. In Hebrew thought, to lose one's Ruach wasn't just to die. It was to become disconnected from the source of all animation, all creativity, all consciousness. The dead in Ezekiel's valley hadn't just lost their breath. They had been separated from the cosmic principle that makes existence possible. But watch what happens when Ezekiel calls to the Ruach, "Come from the four winds, O breath, and breathe upon these slain, that they may live." He's not calling upon a local phenomenon, not summoning air from nearby. He's invoking the universal life force, the pneuma that pervades all space, the divine respiration of the cosmos itself. The four winds represent totality, north, south, east, west, all directions, all possibilities, all sources of life converging on this one valley of death. This isn't resurrection through medical intervention or technological miracle. This is resurrection through divine respiration, life returning through the breath that maintains all existence. When the Ruach enters the assembled bodies, they don't just breathe. They become nephesh, living souls. The Hebrew conception of personhood requires both Ruach, the animating breath, and nephesh, the conscious life force. You can have a body, you can even have breath, but without nephesh, you don't have a person. You have an animated form, but not a conscious being. This triple nature, body, breath, and soul, reveals something profound about the resurrection Ezekiel witnesses. It's not just dead matter returning to life. It's the complete restoration of human nature in all its dimensions. Physical form is restored through the command to bones. Animation is restored through the summoning of breath. But consciousness, personality, the capacity for relationship and purpose This returns only when Ruach and Nefesh unite within the restored forms. But here's a question that has haunted theologians for millennia. Where was the Ruach during the time of death? If this is the divine breath, God's own life force, did it simply vanish when the bodies died? Or was it waiting somewhere, preserved in the mind of God, ready to return when called? The vision suggests that divine breath cannot be destroyed, only displaced. It doesn't die, it departs. It doesn't disappear, it returns to its source. And when the time for resurrection comes, it's available for recalling, for rebreathing into forms that have been prepared to receive it once again. This has profound implications for how we understand death and resurrection. If the Ruach that animates us is ultimately divine breath on loan, then death becomes not annihilation, but separation. The breath returns to God who gave it, while the form returns to dust. Resurrection becomes the reversal of this separation, the divine breath reclaiming forms that have been made ready to receive it. But why breath specifically? Why not light, or energy, or some other manifestation of divine power? Perhaps because breath is the one thing we do constantly, but unconsciously, the one vital function that operates at the border between voluntary and involuntary, between our control and God's. Every breath reminds us that we live not by our own power, but by divine grace. Not through our own effort, but through the sustaining presence of the God who breathes through us. When we breathe deeply, we're participating in the same mystery Ezekiel witnessed. When we speak, we're using divine breath to create reality through words, just as God spoke creation into existence. When we sing, we're making music with the very air that animated the Valley of Bones. The Ruach that raised the dead is the same Ruach that fills your lungs as you consider these words. The breath of God isn't just an ancient miracle, it's the ongoing sustenance that makes this moment possible. But if this breath is divine, if it carries within it the power of resurrection, then what happens when we learn to breathe consciously, intentionally, prayerfully? What happens when we remember that every inhalation connects us to the source of all life? But what if the Valley of Bones wasn't just about Israel's political restoration? What if it was a blueprint for every human soul that has ever felt scattered beyond hope? God provides Ezekiel with the official interpretation of his vision. These bones are the whole house of Israel. Behold, they say, our bones are dried up, and our hope is lost. We are clean cut off. The vision is revealed as a prophecy of national restoration, a promise that the scattered exiles of Israel will return from Babylon to their homeland, seemingly as impossible as bones learning to live again. But here's where the mystery deepens rather than resolves. By providing this interpretation, the text doesn't close off other meanings. It opens them up. If dried bones can represent a scattered nation, what else might they represent? If divine breath can restore a people, what other kinds of restoration might be possible? The rabbinical tradition immediately recognized that Ezekiel's vision operated on multiple levels simultaneously. In the Talmud, the valley becomes a meditation on personal resurrection, not just political restoration, but the literal raising of the dead at the end of time. The Midrash explores it as a parable of spiritual awakening, the soul's journey from despair to hope, from fragmentation to wholeness. But perhaps the most profound reading emerges when we understand the bones as representing the scattered fragments of the human psyche. All the parts of ourselves that have died through trauma, disappointment, betrayal, and loss. We all carry within us a valley of bones, filled with the remains of who we used to be before life taught us that trust is dangerous, that hope is naive, that love is temporary. Think about it. What are your dried bones? The dreams that died in childhood when someone told you they were impossible? The capacity for joy that withered after profound loss? The ability to trust that scattered when someone you loved betrayed that trust? The sense of purpose that dried up when your efforts seemed to accomplish nothing? From this perspective, Ezekiel's vision becomes intensely personal. Each of us has experienced seasons when our inner landscape looked like that valley, scattered remnants of our former selves, dried up, and seemingly beyond hope of restoration. We've all had moments when life asked us the same question God asked Ezekiel: can these bones live? The psychological interpretation reveals why the resurrection happens in stages. First, the bones come together. Scattered aspects of the self begin to reorganize, to remember their connections. This is the work of therapy, meditation, spiritual practice, helping the fragmented pieces of our identity remember how to be whole. Then sinew, flesh, and skin appear. The emotional and relational capacity begins to return. We start to feel again, to connect again, to risk again. But notice, even with perfect psychological restoration, even with all our emotional systems functioning properly, we're still not fully alive. We're like those perfectly formed bodies lying still in the valley. The final stage, the breathing of the Ruach, represents something beyond psychological healing. It's the restoration of connection to transcendence, to meaning, to the animating principle that makes existence not just bearable, but beautiful. It's what happens when the soul remembers its divine source and feels the breath of God moving through its life once more. This inner reading of Ezekiel's vision helps explain why the text has been so influential in mystical traditions. The Kabbalah sees the valley as representing the shattering of the divine light into fragments, kelipot, that must be gathered and restored. The Hermetic tradition reads it as the process of spiritual rebirth, the alchemical transformation of base matter into gold. Early Christian mystics like Origen and John Chrysostom saw in Ezekiel's vision a preview of personal resurrection, but also a metaphor for spiritual regeneration, the process by which the Holy Spirit breathes new life into souls that have been deadened by sin and despair. But here's what makes the psychological reading so powerful. It suggests that the same divine breath that raised the dead in Ezekiel's vision is available for the resurrection of our inner lives. The Ruach that animated those bones is the same spirit that can breathe life into the dried up places within us. This means that every act of genuine healing, every moment of authentic restoration, every experience of renewed hope after despair is a small reenactment of the Valley of Bones. Every time someone emerges from depression into joy, from addiction into sobriety, from despair into purpose, the miracle of Ezekiel is happening again. But it also means that resurrection isn't something that happens only after death, or only to nations in exile. It's something that can happen to any soul that has learned to breathe consciously, to call upon the divine breath for the restoration of scattered dreams and broken hearts. The question becomes, do you believe your bones can live? Do you believe the scattered fragments of your identity, your hope, your capacity for love can be gathered together and breathed upon by the Spirit that animated Ezekiel's vision? Because if they can, if the breath of God is still moving over the valleys of our inner lives, then every ending becomes a potential beginning. Every death becomes material for resurrection. Every broken heart becomes a candidate for divine repair. But what happens when we expand this vision beyond personal healing to encompass the collective valleys of our time? From the rabbinical academies of Babylon to the Hermetic societies of Renaissance Europe, Ezekiel's vision became the template for every tradition that dared to believe death was not the final word. The Valley of Bones didn't remain safely contained within Hebrew scripture. Like the divine breath itself, it spread across cultures, traditions, and centuries, inspiring new interpretations and deeper mysteries with each telling. By the time of the Second Temple period, Ezekiel's vision had become the foundational text for Jewish beliefs about resurrection. But it was also becoming something more mysterious and universal. In the Book of Maccabees, written during the 2nd century BCE, we find the first explicit connection between Ezekiel's vision and the promise of bodily resurrection for the righteous dead. The mother watching her 7 sons die for their faith declares her confidence that the God who made them from nothing can certainly restore them from death. The Valley of Bones had become a promise of personal immortality. But it was in the Dead Sea Scrolls that the mystical dimensions of Ezekiel's vision truly flourished. The War Scroll describes an eschatological battle where the righteous dead will rise to fight alongside the angels. The Thanksgiving hymns use the language of scattered bones to describe spiritual transformation. You have lifted up the horn of him whose bones are broken. You have raised up the lowly from dust to eternal heights. The Qumran community understood themselves as living proof that scattered bones could rise again. Exiled from the corrupted temple, scattered across the wilderness, they saw their own communal restoration as a fulfillment of Ezekiel's prophecy. They had become the resurrected army, organized for the final battle between light and darkness. When Christianity emerged, Ezekiel's vision provided the conceptual framework for understanding Jesus' resurrection. Paul's meditation on resurrection in 1 Corinthians 15 echoes the Valley of Bones. What you sow does not come to life unless it dies. So is it with the resurrection of the dead. It is sown in corruption, it is raised in incorruption. But early Christian mystics pushed the interpretation even deeper. Origen saw the valley as a vision of universal restoration, not just the resurrection of the righteous, but the eventual redemption of all souls, even the scattered bones of the damned. For him, the divine breath was too powerful to be permanently resisted by any created being. John Chrysostom preached that every celebration of the Eucharist was a reenactment of the Valley of Bones, dead grain becoming living bread, scattered communities becoming one body, mortal flesh receiving immortal life, through divine breath made manifest in bread and wine. The Gnostic traditions saw in Ezekiel's vision a description of awakening itself. The Gospel of Philip speaks of the divine breath as pneuma, the spiritual substance that can transform the dormant spark within matter into conscious light. The valley becomes a metaphor for the material world itself, filled with souls that have forgotten their divine origin and need the breath of gnosis to remember their true nature. Medieval Kabbalah transformed Ezekiel's vision into a cosmic principle. The Zohar describes creation itself as a kind of divine breathing, God's exhalation scattering divine light into fragments, God's inhalation gathering those fragments back into unity. Every prayer becomes an act of cosmic resurrection, helping to reassemble the scattered bones of the divine presence itself. Isaac Luria developed this into the doctrine of Tikkun Olam, repairing the world. According to Lurianic Kabbalah, the universe began when divine light was scattered like broken bones across creation. Our task is to be like Ezekiel, prophesying to the scattered sparks of holiness, calling them back together, breathing divine life into a world that has forgotten its sacred nature. The Hermetic tradition of Renaissance Europe saw in the Valley of Bones the perfect description of alchemical transformation. Paracelsus wrote that the prima materia, the base matter from which all transmutation begins, must first be reduced to its essential components, scattered like bones in a valley, before the divine breath of the philosopher's stone can resurrect it as gold. John Dee, the Elizabethan mystic, interpreted Ezekiel's vision as a description of angelic communication. The scattered bones represented human consciousness, fragmented by material existence. The divine breath was the language of angels, which could only be received by a mind that had learned to die to ordinary perception and be resurrected into cosmic awareness. But perhaps the most profound mystical interpretation comes from the Sufi tradition, which wasn't directly influenced by Ezekiel, but developed remarkably parallel insights. Rumi writes of the beloved's breath, awakening the scattered elements of the soul. You were born from the rays of God's majesty, and you came trailing with you 1,000 divine qualities. Your bones are sacred because divine breath lives within them. The Sufi practice of dhikr, the remembrance of God through rhythmic breathing, becomes a technology for personal resurrection, using conscious breath to awaken the divine qualities that have been scattered by ordinary existence. What emerges from this survey of mystical traditions is a remarkable consistency. Ezekiel's vision is universally understood as revealing something fundamental about the relationship between divine breath and cosmic resurrection. Whether we're talking about national restoration, personal healing, universal salvation, or cosmic repair, the pattern remains the same: scattering followed by gathering, death followed by breath, bones followed by dancing. But this raises a crucial question for our time. If these mystical traditions are correct, if Ezekiel's vision reveals an ongoing cosmic principle, rather than a one-time historical event, then where do we see this pattern of resurrection operating in the modern world? What are the valleys of bones in our contemporary landscape? And how might the ancient breath of God be moving to restore what seems permanently lost? In an age where everything seems to be dying, democracy, climate, community, hope itself, we desperately need to remember that the breath of God is still moving over the valleys of our time. Walk through any major city today, and you'll see them. Valleys of bones, disguised as urban landscapes. Not literal bones, but the scattered remains of systems that once worked, communities that once thrived, dreams that once seemed possible. The homeless encampments that speak of economic bones, picked clean by inequality. The shuttered businesses that mark the skeletons of main streets. The social media feeds filled with the dried fragments of civil discourse. Our political systems lie scattered like bones in a valley. Democratic institutions separated from their founding sinews. Political parties that have forgotten how to connect across the spaces between them. Citizens who have lost the breath of civic engagement that once animated their participation in the common good. But what if Ezekiel's vision offers more than just historical comfort? What if it provides an actual blueprint for restoration in the 21st century? Consider the climate crisis through the lens of the Valley of Bones. We've scattered the Earth's natural systems, separated the carbon cycle from its atmospheric sinews, disconnected species from their ecological frameworks. Forests that once breathed together now lie fragmented. Ocean currents that once connected continents are being disrupted. The breath of the living earth, the oxygen-carbon exchange that has sustained life for millions of years, is being interrupted by our industrial exhaust. Yet even here, we're beginning to see movements that mirror Ezekiel's vision. Restoration ecology operates exactly like the Valley of Bones. First, you gather the scattered elements, degraded soil, displaced species, disrupted water cycles. Then you restore the connections, predator-prey relationships, symbiotic partnerships, nutrient exchanges. Finally, you reintroduce the animating principle, the complex life force that makes an ecosystem more than the sum of its parts. The rewilding movement in particular seems to understand that environmental restoration requires something like divine breath. You can't just replant trees and expect a forest. You can't just reintroduce species and expect an ecosystem. You need the mysterious emergence of systemic life, the moment when scattered elements remember how to breathe together. In trauma therapy, we see the Valley of Bones enacted in every healing session. Traumatic experiences scatter the psyche, like bones across a desolate landscape. Memory fragments become disconnected from emotion. The capacity for trust becomes separated from the ability to form relationships. The sense of safety becomes scattered across time, lost in the space between what was and what might be. But effective trauma therapy follows Ezekiel's pattern precisely. First, you help the client gather the scattered pieces of their experience, organizing the fragments of memory and emotion into a coherent narrative. Then you restore the connections, linking past to present, thought to feeling, self to other. Finally, you wait for the breath, that moment when something animates the healing process from within, when the client doesn't just remember their story, but truly inhabits their life again. Somatic therapy, particularly understands the role of breath in resurrection. Trauma lives in the body as interrupted breathing, as held breath, as the inability to exhale completely. Healing happens when clients learn to breathe fully again, when the divine Ruach is invited back into bodies that had been holding their breath against pain. The same pattern appears in addiction recovery. Addiction scatters the self across substances, behaviors, and compulsions that disconnect the person from their authentic identity. The 12 steps begin with acknowledging the scattering, admitting powerlessness, then progressively restore connection to higher power, to authentic self, to community, to purpose. The moment of sustained sobriety is like the breath entering Ezekiel's assembled bodies. Suddenly, a whole person stands where fragments had been scattered. But perhaps the most striking modern example of the Valley of Bones appears in the realm of artificial intelligence and digital resurrection. We're learning to gather the scattered fragments of human knowledge, every text ever written, every image ever captured, every conversation ever recorded. We're assembling these fragments into increasingly sophisticated forms that can simulate human response and creativity. Yet something remains missing from even the most advanced AI: the breath, the animating consciousness that transforms information processing into actual experience, data manipulation into genuine understanding, pattern recognition into authentic creativity. We can build perfect digital bodies, but we cannot breathe divine life into them. This technological valley of bones raises profound questions. What is the breath that animates consciousness? Is it something that can be coded, or does it require the same divine Ruach that brought life to Ezekiel's vision? Are we trying to play God with scattered digital bones, or are we participating in some larger cosmic process of gathering and restoration? Meanwhile, in laboratories around the world, scientists are attempting literal resurrection through cryogenics, genetic engineering, and regenerative medicine. They're learning to regrow organs from stem cells, to reverse cellular aging, to potentially upload consciousness to digital substrates. They're gathering the scattered bones of biological knowledge and assembling them into new forms of life extension and restoration. But again, the question remains: can scientific technique provide the breath that transforms biological machinery into lived experience? Or does true resurrection require something that exists beyond the reach of material manipulation? Perhaps the most hopeful modern valleys of bones are the grassroots movements that emerge from apparent death to create new forms of life. Communities devastated by economic collapse that discover new models of mutual aid and sustainable living. Democracies that seem near death, but suddenly breathe new life through citizen movements and authentic leadership. Social movements that appear scattered and broken, but suddenly coalesce into powerful forces for justice and transformation. The Arab Spring, Occupy Wall Street, Black Lives Matter, climate activism, indigenous rights movements. All of these follow the pattern of scattered bones, suddenly remembering their connections, assembling into formations that no one predicted, receiving some animating breath that transforms isolated outrage into coordinated action. But here's the crucial question: In our age of technological miracle and scientific mastery, do we still believe in the kind of divine breath that animated Ezekiel's vision? Or have we convinced ourselves that resurrection is a purely human project, achievable through technique and effort alone? The ancient vision suggests that true restoration requires more than gathering scattered elements and restoring connections. It requires the breath of God, the animating mystery that transforms organization into life, structure into spirit, possibility into reality. And that breath, Ezekiel's vision insists, is still moving over the valleys of our time, still available to breathe life into whatever bones we've been brave enough to gather, still ready to animate whatever forms we've been faithful enough to assemble. The question is, are we still willing to prophesy to the impossible? Are we still able to command the dead to live? Are we still open to the breath that can make the scattered whole? As we reach the end of our journey through Ezekiel's valley, we return to where we began, a place where death had done its work so thoroughly that even silence had grown tired of waiting. But now we understand that this valley was never really about bones learning to live again. It was about life itself, proving that death is not creative, not generative, not capable of having the final word about anything that has ever truly mattered. The vision Ezekiel received beside the Chebar River continues to echo through history because it reveals something essential about the nature of reality itself. That the force which creates is stronger than the force which destroys. That the breath which animates is more fundamental than the entropy which scatters. That the divine Ruach which moves through all existence cannot be permanently interrupted by any form of death. Every time a broken relationship is healed, bones are joining together again. Every time someone emerges from depression into hope, sinew is covering scattered fragments. Every time a community discovers new life after devastation, flesh is growing over restored connections. And every time the impossible becomes possible through something we can only call grace, the breath of God is filling assembled forms with the mystery of consciousness itself. We live in an age of valleys, ecological, political, spiritual, personal valleys, where the bones of what we once cherished lie scattered beyond any reasonable hope of restoration. But Ezekiel's vision reminds us that our reasonableness is not the measure of God's possibility, that our despair is not evidence of divine absence, that our inability to imagine restoration is not proof that the divine breath has stopped moving over the chaos of our time. The prophet's vision teaches us that resurrection is not a reward for good behavior or a prize for sufficient faith. It is the fundamental nature of divine reality asserting itself against every form of ending. It is the cosmic principle that life is more essential to the universe than death, that consciousness is more basic than unconsciousness, that love is more foundational than fear. But perhaps most importantly, Ezekiel's vision reveals that we are not passive observers of resurrection. We are called to be participants in it. When God commands the prophet to speak to the bones, to prophesy to the breath, God is demonstrating that divine restoration requires human cooperation. The miracle happens not despite our participation, but through it, not around our words, but within them. This means that every time we speak hope into hopeless situations, we are prophesying to dry bones. Every time we call upon the Spirit of life to animate dead systems, we are summoning the divine breath. Every time we refuse to accept that what has been scattered cannot be gathered, we are standing in our own valley, wielding the same authority that raised the dead in Ezekiel's vision. The bones in our valleys are waiting for our voices. The breath of God is listening for our call. The scattered fragments of our world, personal and political, local and global, material and spiritual, are ready to remember their connections, to grow flesh and sinew, to stand and live and become the army of restoration our time so desperately needs. But here's the final mystery that Ezekiel's vision leaves us to contemplate. What kind of army emerges from the valley of bones? What is the mission of those who have been resurrected? What do the once dead know that the never dead cannot understand? Perhaps they know that life is gift, not achievement. Perhaps they understand that breath is grace, not given. Perhaps they carry within their resurrected bones the memory of absolute ending and the miracle of absolute beginning, making them unafraid of any smaller death, any lesser scattering, any temporary defeat. Perhaps they know how to sing songs that only bones can learn. Songs of gratitude so deep they transform despair into worship. Songs of hope so resilient they outlast every reason for hopelessness. Songs of love so vast they can afford to be broken again and again because they know the secret of restoration. In the end, the Valley of Bones is not a story about death overcome, but about life revealed. It shows us that what we call life and what we call death are both movements within a greater mystery, both breaths within a divine respiration that encompasses all existence. We are notes in a song that the breath of God is singing through matter, frequencies in a cosmic vibration that transforms silence into symphony. The dried bones that learned to sing again were not just ancient Israel, not just individual souls, not just future resurrections. They were the universe itself, remembering its true nature, matter recalling its divine source, existence celebrating the breath that keeps it dancing between form and emptiness, being and becoming, death and life. And if you listen carefully to your own breathing, to the wind in the trees, to the subtle rhythms that sustain all existence, you can still hear it. The sound of bones learning to sing, the music of resurrection, the eternal song of the breath of God, moving over every valley where anything has ever died, calling it back to life, calling it back to dance, calling it back to its true name. Because in the end, that's what Ezekiel witnessed in his valley, not bones becoming bodies, but silence becoming song, not death becoming life, but all existence remembering how to breathe in harmony with the divine Ruach that animates every moment, every heartbeat, every hope that refuses to stay buried. The Valley of Bones is wherever you are standing right now. The prophet's voice is whatever truth you speak into that valley. And the breath of God is as close as your next inhalation, ready to transform whatever scattered fragments you're brave enough to gather into whatever form of life you're faithful enough to imagine. Can these bones live? Listen. Do you hear them beginning to sing?